developed when he was a young child that led to that persistence that he had later on. But my view is that in every park in the country you can see the capacity for learning of even the youngest. And it's this capacity that we have to nurture. So I just want to show you a short video clip just to stimulate some thinking.
What are you trying to do?
Challenges Louise was referring to, but it's context that has to be understood. That child's just 2, he's just weaned, he's loved by his parents and his extended family. His family have the good sense to provide some parameters for him. He's wearing a helmet so he doesn't get brain damage if he falls off his skateboard. But it's not a high-tech situation that he's exposed to. He's using his father's skateboard. His family don't feel the need to extend economically in order to provide him with all the tools. If you listen to him, his speech, you might say, is a bit slow, but the context there is that's because he's exposed to 2 languages in his home environment. So one of the things I've become even more aware of since leaving a school environment is that issue of context. And I think that in all the literature that we're exposed to and the comparisons that are made across countries, that it's often this notion of context that's left out. So I attended a conference in Helsinki with a number of people in this room just a few weeks ago, and I befriended a group of South African principals, and they were certainly over the accolades that were being heaped on the Finnish education system for education performance. The circumstances of their schools in South Africa make the challenges of our system look minor, but compared to the differences with the Finnish system, there is just nothing that is, it would seem very little that is the same. So that over a few drinks, these South African friends suggested that what they really needed in Finland to test whether they were such a high-performing system was a few boatloads of refugees enrolled in their schools. They felt that that would test their ability. So my question of our esteemed panel is, from your perspective, and you might refer to that perspective and that role that you have, how do you think we should be building capacity in leading and learning, particularly given the context that we operate in, even within Victoria, and in our world where sometimes simplistic comparisons are made across our systems? So Louise, I might ask you first to respond to that. So each panel member will have 5 to 7 minutes, and then at the end of that we would like to make this interactive, so be thinking of questions as we progress. So thank you, Louise.
Thank you. Just, can you all hear me? Yes. I feel that in many ways that I answered the question, because at the heart of what I'm focusing on is creating capacity for learning. And I think you all always have to tailor that to your own experience and your own context. At the heart of any endeavour to create any capacity for people to be open to learning a different way is the whole issue of feeling safe, feeling secure, and having those positive relationships. So I take that as an absolute underpinning for all of this. I wanted to add in one more thing from my experience of working in Norway. As I mentioned in my keynote, we've been doing a lot of work with people trying to think about, well, how can we use data? What are good data for us to use? How can we create good processes? And one of the things that have come out of all of the discussions is all of that's very well, but unless we bring a kind of particular mindset, and really it underpins particular values about the way we believe, what we think about learning and our values about learning, then we're not going to make the most of this. And they are talking about a learning mindset where people are open, and this means that we all have to work on this for ourselves and work on it for others. People are open to new approaches, new ideas, new designs, and willing to step into the unknown. Where, as Edgar Schein has talked about it, it's now in our learning mindset, if we want to do this for children and for adults, it's more important to ask good questions than to come up with the expertise, and to develop relationships through asking questions that you don't know the answer to. Through that growth orientation of thinking that the learning journey is more important than the performance journey. Through learning from mistakes, and that came up both in what I said and in what Steve has said. Through really learning with others, co-learning, co-thinking, through interrupting our assumptions, and I talked about that earlier. New learning is really hard work, and it's about thinking and knowing and understanding differently. And I think if we want to create capacity for learning, we have to disrupt our natural ways of doing things, whether we do that through comedy courses or whatever. We have to disrupt, we have to find ways to disrupt. And constantly talking about this, talking the walk, and practicing. Gordon Stobart, who's spent a lot of time looking at expert learners, says we don't get into our cars in the morning and say, how can I get better at changing gears? We just do it automatically. But what we really need to do is we need to become experts ourselves in learning. And we create the capacity by starting with ourselves.
Okay, Bruce, you might even let people know what your current role is.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you for the opportunity for being here this morning. It's just after the hour, so this afternoon. My current role is Acting Deputy Secretary, Regional Services Group, and it doesn't seem that long ago that I was perhaps attending conferences like this, Judy, as a secondary school principal, and I have had the privilege and the responsibility of leading at various levels of the system as a school principal, and then in a regional office as an acting assistant regional director, and as director of VASSP and executive director within the department. I kind of feel like I've been earning my stripes along the way. So you were talking about context before, and I think context is particularly important. So there are a few reflections that I would have on this notion of leadership and learning. And I think the first one that I would start with is that the premise that I've struggled with is that all adults can learn. We have no trouble with all children can learn, do we? It kind of shakes our belief system when we think that all adults can learn. I've met some of them that I think have been impervious for a whole range of personal, professional reasons. People get stuck, and then you may be stuck with them. And then we look for our graduates to re-professionalise and re-energise our school workforce, which is probably not a surefire bet for improving the culture and performance of our schools. So I think that starting with the premise that leadership is learnable, it's a set of skills and abilities that can be learned, is a very powerful premise, and it's one that motivated and animated me in setting up with the team all of the work that VASSP did a really powerful belief that we can shift our position and thinking if we're invested in and given the opportunities and the context for adult learning. And I think that one of the most significant challenges for all of us is to create the conditions for powerful adult learning within our schools. And I'll touch on that a little bit because I think that is a very significant challenge. To believe that then means that there are a whole range of different ways in which people read and learn, and some of that is through reading, some of it is through collaboration, some of it is through reflection, and some of it is through projects and application. But as Barry Pelsner and Jim Koussis in their book, The Leadership Challenge, it's a kind of 25-year-old edition, but it's been reprinted, it's sold millions of copies across the globe. If you haven't read it, it's a great leadership read, The Leadership Challenge by Koussis and Posner. And they looked at and reflected on all of that research, and they said that what comes first, leadership or learning? And they said without doubt, learning. It's always learning first. And it's about learning and getting lots of feedback. And as I've applied for each of those positions, I think I've had more 360-degree feedback in volumes and reports on my leadership style, capabilities, inadequacies, the Johari window, the blind spots that are brought into view to work on that would take a couple of lifetimes to work on. But leadership of self, I think, is also a really critical thing in building your own skill and capability, and shifting position forces you to do that. If you stay in the same context, shifting your perspective becomes much harder to do. Reorienting how you view your organisation, its people, its structures, processes and its purpose takes deliberately making a choice to continue to relearn. So the first thing is that leadership is a set of skills and abilities that can be learned over time, given the right conditions, support, and that comes in many ways. And in his book, it's quite challenging. They say that it's kind of 1 to 2 hours of practice per day. And I think that as leaders in schools, you're doing that all the time if you're reflective. But some people also can get stuck in their roles, and the role takes over their own sense of professional identity. So they would say that learning comes first, then leadership. And the other thing that I really love about their book, and in the conversation, Jim Koussis was asked, well, what is the thing that you've learned that's had the most powerful impact on you through 25 years of research on leadership across not-for-profits, business, military, all the professions that you can think of in education? And he said this, and he learned it from a US military general, which I find kind of terrifying. In a sense, what might you learn from a person that has committed in that way to their professional career? They said that leadership is an affair of the heart before it's an affair of the head. That you have to love what you do every day and love doing the work with the people that you work with. I think that that's really important. That deep sense of inner motivation and inspiration and passion, and a love for the work and loving the people that you do the work with. And I suppose that notion of love is a very powerful one. It's not like, it's the ability to work with, to forgive, to move on, to have a fresh start with people every day, just like we do with children and young people that we teach and lead. So leadership, I think, then is a passion, and it has to be purposeful. It's for something. And Simon Breakspeare's been here talking about the future of learning and the new educational leaders, and I think that I'll close with this. I think that one of the most challenging things for secondary school principals is that secondary school performance across this state is not uniformly good, and our biggest performance challenges for children and young people are our outcomes in secondary schooling. And I think the challenge of that is that the culture of collaboration that we hope to achieve within secondary schools in bringing teachers together around their work in powerful ways, to co-design curriculum, to give feedback to each other, to moderate common assessments, to do all of that work collaboratively, means that we have to think about the organisational structures that are embedded within secondary schooling in the timetable. And I think that there's a huge challenge around leadership for learning that requires people to work together in meaningful ways, in meaningful work. And for all of us, that construct, that industrial construct of schooling, is a constraint upon the way in which we'd like to work together. And I think the power of the intellect and capacity in that room is a challenge that we ought to collectively give our thinking to about what does redesign secondary school as look like at this part, in this moment in time, and for the future for students. Thanks.
So David, from your perspective with the Curriculum Authority for quite a period of time, what are your views on this topic?
Thank you, Judy. Thank you, everyone. You invited a reflection at the start in different contexts, and you mentioned South Africa took me back to a different context. We worked in Cambodia, based in Phnom Penh, for a little over 4 years, a little while ago. And one of the things I remembered as you were talking was the experience of going into a number of classrooms that are very remote, to the extent that exams in some of the areas are delivered by an elephant, because that's the only way to get through the monsoonal mud. But these are classrooms that have been rebuilt over the last few years since the destruction of the Khmer Rouge. But in a particular group of classrooms in a number of villages, there were blackboards up on the wall, but there was a wooden box, a bit like a fruit packing crate, under each of the blackboards. And I said to one of the teachers who got to know, like, what's the story? What happened here? And it was a well-meaning aid group from, it was either Sweden or the US had come through, and the blokes had one hand up to hold the blackboard up, the other hand to put the driller, and it drilled the blackboards on. But they were 6'2", and most Cambodians are about 5'4", so they couldn't actually reach the blackboards. So instead of moving the blackboard, they're taking a much simpler solution of moving the packing box. What we were doing there in that work was working out the curriculum for the new Cambodian society after the Khmer Rouge. They inherited the French colonial system, and they thought French curriculum might not be the most appropriate. And there was a lot of discussion around issues like those who would advocate for the importance of life skills in the curriculum, learning how to fish, learning how to grow rice. The other view that was put was that these kids are going to know that better than anyone will ever be able to teach them, because that's what they grow up with. What they want to know is something else. Literacy and numeracy, and actually what they most wanted to learn was Chinese and Vietnamese, so they wouldn't be ripped off by their trading neighbours when they were bartering over the border. And I think what I want to do is put, it's not a counterclaim, because I really don't want to put this up as an opposition or a binary. I want to say there's a both and, but I want to put a claim for adding the and rather than just leaving the other hanging. And I guess my impression has been that the last 2 days, the day and a half, has been a powerful and a really important focus on the how of leading. Like the how we create learning communities, how we create effective cultures this morning, that question of the how. I just want to add, there's another question, which is the what for. Right? What is it that we want young people to be learning? Because that's actually the purpose of the how. And this is a both and proposition, but I do think the question of what do we want young people to learn has been more observed in the breach than being given real consideration. And it's partly because the dominant discourse is it doesn't matter anymore, right? It doesn't matter what kids learn, because what we really need to be developing are the skills of learning, the skills of processing, the skills of analysing. And again, I want to put a claim for both, to say, yes, of course that's true. But there's a place for having a really sustained conversation at the school level about the what is it that we want our kids to be learning. And to leave you with the illustration of the point, this isn't about arcane notions of algebra or particular rote memorisation. It's a reminder that when a recent civics and citizenship assessment was done across Australia, 17% of Year 6 and 27% of Year 10 students could articulate why Australia Day should be called Invasion Day. Right? That's 1 in 4 Year 10s. It's not to be able to argue why it should. It wasn't trying to persuade them that it should. It was simply to be able to explain why. Why would some people argue that Australia Day should be called Invasion Day? Right? Now, you can't do that unless you know something about Australian history. And I do think that as part of the education state announcements in later in September, the Minister will be launching the final version of long overdue Ausbell's F to 10 curriculum. And I think that's going to provide the chance for a new and a different and a focused discussion at the school level about how are we going to ensure that every young person in our school leaves with a set of knowledge and skills and the attributes that will equip them to be productive citizens. And it will be about what knowledge do they need in terms of what they understand about the world around them, but it will also be the attributes, their capacity as critical and creative thinkers, their capacity for resilience. And I think it's going to be, it'll be an opportunity that is too important to miss.
Okay, so far you've been a very good panel because you haven't gone over time, which leaves lots of opportunities for questions. So we would like to invite questions. Gary and Russell have got mics so that your questions can be heard. There's one at the back of the room, so we're looking for some questions from the audience to get some discussion going. Here's one. Robin.
I'd like to ask the panel, we've heard a lot about supporting our staff, and supporting our staff in behavioural change to improve student outcomes is something that we all aspire to. Apart from providing time and space for effective collaboration and loving the people that we work with, as Bruce indicated, what does support actually look like?
Bruce.
Thank you. I'm happy to tackle that. I think that support means investing in their growth and development. I mean, I think that one of the challenges that we have is to set up meaningful contemporary adult learning systems within schools. And depending on the size of your school, the structures of your school, how do you do that in a way that teachers don't feel like they're being done to at the end of the day? I think that that's a really significant challenge, because the support that you want to offer in that way is not necessarily received as a gift. When they're very clear on what the expectations may be about the number of meeting hours that they should attend and what that looks like. But I think a professional conversation about how do we continue to learn so that our children can continue to learn? What are the needs of the students that are manifest in our data that say that we don't have the skill or expertise to be able to influence their learning, the what of learning, and then support them in that? And I think that that creates a tangible hunger for learning. I think that the initial, putting that in place initially, if you don't have it in your school, is quite a significant cultural shift in terms of expectation. And having done that in a number of schools, it always is bumpy at the beginning, I think. But personally, building teams and investing in team development where people feel genuinely engaged in making the decisions about the work is a form of supporting them.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, Darren Tripp at Yarra Hills Secondary College. Yesterday and today there's been a lot of talk about collaboration and about how we collectively improve the results across the system. Also about the fact that even within our own schools we have islands of best practice and trying to get the teachers to share those sort of things. But the notion of the way the schools themselves are sort of pitted against each other in the competitive environment isn't conducive to us being able to share best practice across the system. How do you see us getting around that?
I think that's for you too, Bruce. And Louise is contributing as well. Yeah.
Well, I'm happy to start on that because England has a very the accountability systems measure schools independently, separately, although the inspection system looks to the extent to which schools are collaborating. I think there are many things that work against it. My experience has been that the schools that actually themselves take the opportunities and decide to focus on collaborating. I'd like to add to Bruce's answer from before in terms of absolutely agreeing about the professional learning. Giving people the opportunity to visit other places, taking the opportunity as school leaders to visit other schools, to see practice in other schools, and giving people the opportunity to carry out inquiry together. My experience over time is that that takes over from the collaboration, from the competition, and the experience is that the results also improve because everybody has got something that we can share from each other. So, for example, I mentioned this earlier, principals going out and taking the opportunity to review each other's schools without having someone from outside telling them what they're looking at, but them coming up with and looking at procedures and things that they want to do. It sounds nebulous, but it is extremely concrete of people trying things and taking the opportunity to go out and step into each other's places, and that itself builds that kind of culture.
Aaron, I'll try and answer it as best I can. I think that there are, particular in the funding formula through the student resources package, that's what you're talking about, the number of students that are coming in and enrolling in a school and seeking market share. I'll probably try and tackle the question in a different way, if I may, and I'm not trying to get around the question, because I think it is a complex one. But I believe in the public system as a public good. And I believe that every children, no matter where they live, or their background, or their circumstances, should have the right to a high quality education that's offered by the public system. The strength of the public offer comes through the degree to which we can join up this system. Our true competition in that sense is not the neighbouring school. I don't believe that. The other thing that I would say is that you can share all of your practices, you can have visitation, you can open up your school will be enriched by those visits, because teachers who have to engage with visitors about the core of their work start to make what is tacit in teaching and leadership explicit and able to be verbalised. Once they're able to teach another, like they would teach a student, they own that knowledge base and they can grow from it. So every opportunity that you have to take visitors internationally, locally, from interstate through your school and to show them the work that you are doing and get people to talk about the story of how they got there, what's not working and what is, will strengthen the school improvement project in your school. So if we take Toyota as an example, the US flew teams of people from Detroit to Toyota and their various plants around Japan to try and understand their manufacturing processes. And the very head of Toyota said at the time when that was happening in the 1980s and 1990s was, you can look at all of our processes and all of our practices, but you can't take our culture. And they could not replicate it except for one plant in the United States to get their total quality management systems in place. So you have the freedom in abundance, I believe, to share that will grow this system by collaborating deeply. As somebody said before, the challenge that we've had is pockets of excellence. How do you get the teachers who are the best to share it with the rest? And many teachers don't think that they're good. So this kind of collegiality and equality means that it must be the kids, it's not me, except for when they're not learning, and then it's probably them or their families or where they've come from. But their success is probably not normally attributed, teachers don't normally attribute it to themselves. Sometimes they do. And then I think that we should have, I believe, a compact that we want to grow the public education system to be as strong as it can across the state, so that all comers are welcome and all have an opportunity to achieve to high levels.
Thank you. There's a question at the front from Steve. Barry, you've got a mic?
Thank you. And Judy, your reference to Helsinki reminded me of my recent experience in being part of that opportunity, I guess. And it was the 12th International Conference of Principals, 1,200 principals from around the globe, representing close to 1 million students. And the Finnish Minister for Education and Culture said in her opening address that any institution that aims to be long-lasting needs to establish international relationships. And I'm interested in the panel's view on, in terms of educational leadership, what do they see as the potential benefits in establishing relationships in a global context, both for the education state, Victorian education state, and indeed for the educational leaders in the room?
How would you go with that one?
Briefly, I think as much as we can, the more the better. The instances of where we found that particularly useful has been the contact with Wolfram Computing in London. That's led to the use of Mathematica as a platform for math methods. CAS can be online now, so it's starting. For us, it is very much finding pockets of excellence, starting small, working out how they can be scaled up. And I think it's always that, looking for the small and understand the small and how that can be made larger rather than looking for the entire solution somewhere else.
I had the opportunity to follow a group of principals. I didn't actually go with them, but I followed a group of principals who, a number of years ago, who came to Victoria, and then another group of principals from the same school district at the time who went off to New Zealand, and looking at the huge possibilities, and it goes back to the issue of context and culture, that they were able, their eyes were very opened to the possibilities of ways of doing things differently, and then taking those back and nuancing them to fit in the culture. I mean, there were just very obvious things. I think one of the things that came through so strongly in New Zealand in terms of the Maori rituals and the way that the school started in the morning when they were visiting, and it made them understand community so much better. So I think what it does is it gives you a different lens. Now, the possibilities of actually visiting places, I know we don't always have that, and that is, I know sometimes gets to be more difficult in some times than in other times. But we also have possibilities to connect technologically, and I know many of your schools will be connected. We are a very connected world now. And I think there is an issue around looking for best practice, but there is also an issue around looking for new practice and different practice and thinking what that means for us. So as we look at one level to look at the research, and a lot of the research with high effect sizes has come out of New Zealand, there's a lot going on in Australia, we can do that. But we also need to be looking at new and different practice and thinking about what that means for us. And a lot of that is going on in different places and different cultures.
Just adding a comment. I think the other thing to remember, and I think it's important to say, we often talk about internationalisation as us looking out. We should be aware of really how much interest there is in what's happening at individual school and at the system level here. There are so many things that are regarded in Victoria as outstanding best practice that people are very interested in. We lose sight of that when we're in the middle looking out. It's just worth important remembering sometimes.
Thank you for that. There's a question down here.
Thank you. Jessica Sargent from Ballarat. I found over the last couple of days it's been fantastic to hear lots of ways to build our capacity as leaders, to be innovative, with a focus on redesigning education, reimagining schools, and looking at 21st century skills and principles. in collaboration and creativity. Yesterday afternoon I got to go to a session which we were able to share some robotics that had been done at a school in the United States. What I'm wanting to ask is that all of this is great and we're building great opportunities for innovative pedagogy, etc. But we find it very difficult with maintaining to a specific space schedule. So we talk about the principles of adult learning, but some of our classrooms are envisioned to actually fit quite small children when we've got 18-year-olds. We want to invest in our science programs and develop creative learning spaces, but we're very hamstrung by a schedule that says we have to fit this amount of students in this amount of space, whereas our private or independent schools down the road don't have to confront those issues. What would you suggest in terms of combating this in our pedagogy and making state schools a viable option for everyone in the community?
No, they're going to look to me. I wish the Deputy Premier was here to answer that question. Yes, I thought it probably was. Look, I think the difficulty, there are many constraints, and I think that schools do extraordinarily well within their resource base to reimagine spaces, to use locally raised funds and saving that they've been able to make out of their budget to be able to make minor modifications. There's no doubt that this government and future governments will continue to need to look at the asset base for the state, and I know that Chris Keating and his team have been working on trying to properly evaluate the current state of the asset base and develop a proper pipeline for development. I think that, I mean, it would be too cute for me to say that I think the powerful pedagogy can probably occur in most spaces, but there are significant constraints in heritage buildings, in schools that have been created, in LTCs that lock people off from each other. That is the given, and I think that if it's working as creatively as you can, it would be cute for me to be able to say anything else.
I think one of the other clear constraints that we operate in is industrial circumstances, that is so limiting in many respects. That's what I found as a principal. It often limited the things that we could do. But even to think beyond what we do, to imagine something that is different industrially is quite hard for us to do. And I have found those travels, speaking to people who run schools of 4,000 people and they have 40 foot entrances, or as in Finland where they have an industrial situation where people actually get paid per class rather than as we have it in Victoria. But I think to get out of our ways of thinking industrially too is actually as big an issue as the facility restrictions that we work under.
Vernon Lynch from Wodonga Senior Secondary College. Yesterday the Minister made some comments about providing instruction or providing education for all students. He used the term "when all needs all." We have a huge number of students now in Victoria, probably Australia-wide, who are not playing the game of school. And in other words, many are not turning up, not enrolling, and sort of opting out of school. What do you see as the implications with regard to the system, and also in terms of the VCAA, with how they're going to cope with such an increase in misconduct, which is to some degree becoming epidemic, one could say, or no, sort of it's challenging our existing paradigm?
I was so relieved that when you said VCAA, so I'm going to have to take I'm glad somebody else.
Explain a little more, because retention rates are at 82% now. So is there a substantial cohort of kids who are disengaged? Yes. Is there a substantial cohort of kids who are not completing? Right, less so. So I think distinguishing between those two is a starting point. I mean, I guess I see that as that's the fundamental challenge, right? Because it is for all. It's not just the kids who are disengaged; it's the kids who are a bit engaged. Right? Is there something that is lacking in the curriculum structure. I'd be interested in hearing the case for what was missing. I think having both VCE and VCAA in Victoria is really significant. It's still the only state that does that. I think that would change nationally. I think there's going to be much more national interest. I think the greater flexibility that schools will have in curriculum planning 7 to 10 will give people more capacity to do the things that they want to do. So I'm interested, I guess, in hearing more about the challenge that you want to push.
I think the Minister talks about 11,000 students not enrolled in school, and sees that as a tragedy.
Yeah. So there are 10 or 11,000 students who are not enrolled in schooling at the moment. That is, I think, a significant system challenge, and the Minister is very aware of that, and we'll see what might come out in any announcements. But Bern, you've been working very hard with a group of schools to respond to that need as well. And I think it is about trying to, once again, use the power of principal networks to tackle this on the ground with regions and with additional regional support and multidisciplinary teams. I think that we will be able to do that. And there is a whole of government commitment to trying to join up government at the moment. And we've only got 7 government departments and a huge number of interdepartmental committees that have been formed around this. So I think there is an awareness that some of our most vulnerable and most disadvantaged students are overrepresented in that group of students who are disengaged. And I think that there are reasons why students, particularly from the upper levels of primary around 5 and 6, start to disengage from schooling. And their learning lives are interrupted because they don't have foundational skills in literacy and numeracy that are a gateway to access into secondary in that transition. So that's when the disengagement begins, and then you're trying to do them off in year 8, year 9 and 10 and re-engage them. And I think it would be fair to say that we've got an 82% retention rate of that Cert 2 and above. You would probably think that Cert 3 or 4 would be necessary to function in a modern advanced economy, and with the structural adjustments taking place in the Victorian economy at the moment, you would think that you're going to need to have higher levels of skill. So certainly pressing more students into completion, and the task gets harder as the percentage rises above that kind of 82 to 5% to getting into the 90s with alternative pathways. But I think it is going to be about local solutions to local problems with support. And then there will be some other system-wide initiatives that will need to kick in, and that will mean particularly partnerships with the Department of Justice, the Department of Health and Human Services in particular. I know many of you are engaged in helping navigate that very complex and demanding territory with students that are most at risk.
Louise? For me, I think it is also about paying very, very close attention to students and to children and young people about what they say about their learning. And I think they can be incredibly articulate. I saw a video yesterday when I was in South Australia at the conference. It showed children, young people talking about their learning, about their aspirations, about what helps them to learn. Although context is different, I've seen very, very similar videos. I've been into schools, I've heard young people talking in various different countries. And for the most part, those people who are still there, and so they haven't disengaged so much that they're not even in school. A lot of them are saying, in short, that we are not paying attention to those learning principles that I put up. We are not paying attention to engaging, to helping them make those connections between what is going on in their lives outside and the kinds of things that interest them and the ways that many of them are learning indeed and can be very incredibly creative in their lives outside, and the things that are interesting them and the opportunities, and we are not making sufficient connections and connecting with them sufficiently individually. One of the most exciting projects that I have seen has come out of British Columbia, where people are actually asking the students questions they get directly into issues of self-concept, whether there are adults in schools that believe that they can be successes in life, and whether they understand the purpose of what they're doing, why they're learning what they're learning, not in order to get a job, but why they're doing this today, what they're doing, whether they understand what good learning is. There's so many basic questions, and those kinds of questions are really profoundly changing the kinds of teaching and learning that are going on in those schools, and there are more students staying in schools and better results.
And for me, that little video clip earlier of a young child where the motivation is intrinsic, so there is intrinsic satisfaction for him in the skill that he is acquiring. He has, he's obviously modelling his behaviour on what he has seen of others. And so somehow we lose that, and I don't think it's fair enough just to say it's a developmental stage, but you know, to find what intrinsically motivates kids, it's easier when they're that age, but as they get older, but that has got to be the key, and you know it in the children that you intimately associate with, that you know, it's finding their key to what's going to turn them on, so that it's intrinsic motivation that really causes people, I think, to commit more. But it sometimes seems to be a challenge in the mass organisations that we run to find that for all kids. So Bob, you're winding us up. Is there a final question? Or comment? There is one. Fantastic. Kate.
Just a question beyond what you were just talking about. One of the things I've noticed around the North American system is a desire for the universities to want to know more about the student than the numerical ATA in our case. And that seems to be a driver for some of the programs that happen in schools around what we may call passion projects or areas of interest that students have, and they have to represent themselves beyond just their academic achievements. I'm interested in where the department's at around that VCAA and the discussions that are happening with the tertiary sector.
I think it's one of the changes that has gone unnoticed. The year before last, Monash University took in, for the first time, more than 50% of the first year intake from a non-direct ATAR entry. And almost no one knows that. And so the capacity of us to work with our students, to talk about the huge variety of ways that there are in now, it is something that is happening and requires us to catch up. I think we're edging towards that. The introduction of the extended investigation, the chance to do that at VCAA. Kids have done some extraordinary things in that. They use that as part of the portfolio that they're now presenting to tertiary selection officers at the individual institutions. So I think it is a change that's already happening and is only going to accelerate.
Thank you, David and Bruce and Louise, for being prepared to be part of this panel, and thank you for your questions. Panel start working as we get those questions going. So I'd ask you to show your appreciation for